You know that feeling when your entire world crumbles in front of dozens of people? When the person you trusted most turns into your worst nightmare? I lived that moment. And what happened next? Well, let me just say, karma doesn't always come slowly. Sometimes you have to give it a little push. My name is Marcus, and for 7 years, I was the backbone of Titanium Solutions, a mid-sized tech consulting firm in downtown Chicago. 7 years of late nights, sacrificed weekends, and skipped family dinners. 7 years of building something I truly believed in. But on a cold Tuesday morning in November, everything changed. I walked into the office at 8:30 just like always, coffee in hand, ready to tackle another project deadline. The air felt different that day, tense, electric, like everyone knew something I didn't. My coworkers avoided eye contact. Sarah from accounting gave me this pitying look that made my stomach twist. Conference room now. It was Derek Patterson, my boss. My mentor, the man who had recruited me fresh out of college, the man I'd helped climb the corporate ladder, covering for his mistakes, fixing his disasters, making him look brilliant to the board of directors. I followed him down the hallway, confused but not worried. We'd been through tough times before. Whatever this was, we'd figure it out together. Right? Wrong? The conference room was packed. 20, maybe 25 people from different departments. HR was there. Legal was there. Even Carl from IT, who never attended anything. My heart started pounding. Derek stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, face cold as stone. This wasn't the Derek who'd bought me drinks last Friday. This wasn't the Derek who called me his right-hand man in front of clients. This was someone else entirely. Marcus, he began, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We've discovered some serious irregularities in the Anderson project you've been leading. My blood ran cold. The Anderson project was our biggest account, a $3 million contract with a Fortune 500 company. I'd poured 6 months of my life into it. What irregularities? I managed to ask, my voice barely steady. Derek clicked a remote, and the projector screen lit up with financial documents. Numbers, spreadsheets, emails, all with my name on them. These unauthorized expenses. These communications with competitors. These questionable decisions that put our entire reputation at risk. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Those weren't my decisions. Those expenses were approved by Derek himself. Those emails were taken completely out of context, edited, manipulated, Derek. That's not save it. He cut me off, his voice sharp as a knife. We have all the evidence we need. Effective immediately. You're terminated for gross misconduct and breach of company policy. The room went silent. You could hear people breathing. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You can't be serious. Derek, you know this is security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to clear your desk. And Marcus, he leaned forward, and for just a second, I saw something in his eyes. Satisfaction. Pure, cold satisfaction. Don't even think about using me as a reference. Laughter. Quiet, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. Orchestrated. A public execution designed to humiliate me. But why? I found out later as security followed me to my desk like I was some criminal. As I packed my personal photos, my awards, my 7 years of loyalty into a cardboard box. As former friends and colleagues pretended to be busy, afraid to even look at me. Derek needed a scapegoat. The Anderson project was hemorrhaging money because of his terrible decisions. His expensive ego, his refusal to listen to anyone's advice. But Derek Patterson never took the fall for anything. He was a master at deflecting blame. At rewriting history, and I was the perfect target. Loyal, trusting, too naive to see the knife coming for my back as I walked through that office for the last time. Box in my hands, head down in shame, I made a decision. Derek Patterson thought he'd destroyed me. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what he'd just started. The first week after being fired was the darkest period of my life. I barely left my apartment. Didn't answer calls. Didn't check emails. I just sat there, replaying that conference room nightmare over and over in my mind. The faces, the whispers, the laughter. My girlfriend, Lisa, tried to comfort me. "You'll bounce back," she'd say, bringing me coffee. I wouldn't drink. "Someone will see your value." She didn't understand. In our industry, being fired for gross misconduct was a death sentence. Derek had made sure that story spread everywhere. Within 48 hours, every company in Chicago knew my name, and not in a good way. I sent out 73 resumes in 2 weeks. I got exactly 0 counts. My savings were draining fast. Rent was due. Bills were piling up. And every night, I'd lie awake, angry and helpless, thinking about Derek sitting in his corner office, probably laughing about how easily he'd gotten rid of me. But then something shifted. I was going through old files on my laptop, looking for portfolio samples, when I stumbled across a folder I'd forgotten about. It was labeled insurance, a collection of documents I'd saved over the years. Not because I was planning anything, just because I was thorough, because I documented everything. And as I started looking through those files, really looking, I realized something incredible. I had everything. 7 years of Derek's emails to me, screenshots of his actual decisions on the Anderson project, voice memos from meetings where he'd explicitly approved those unauthorized expenses, text messages where he'd bragged about cutting corners to boost profits, financial records that proved he'd been cooking the books long before I ever touched that project. I had the truth, but more than that, I had something else. Something Derek had completely forgotten about in his rush to throw me under the bus. I still had access to everything. Let me explain. At Titanium Solutions, I wasn't just another employee. I was the systems guy before we even had a proper IT department. I'd built half of our internal infrastructure. I'd set up security protocols, access credentials, administrative permissions, and Derek, brilliant businessman that he thought he was, had never understood how any of it actually worked. When I'd handed over my official access badges and passwords to security, I'd given them exactly what HR required. But there were other doors, other pathways, other keys that existed in the system's architecture itself, back doors I'd created for emergency access, maintenance ports I'd built for system updates. I'd never thought about them as weapons before. They were just ... tools, practical solutions to practical problems. But now they were something else entirely. I sat at my laptop for 6 hours straight that night, coffee going cold beside me, mapping out every piece of leverage I had, every file, every access point, every digital footprint Derek had carelessly left behind. By 3 a.m, I had a plan. It was risky. If I got caught, I'd never work in tech again. Maybe worse. But Derek had already destroyed my career, my reputation, my future. What did I have to lose? Lisa found me still awake at dawn, laptop screen glowing in the dark. "Marcus, you need to sleep. You need to move on." I looked at her, and maybe she saw something different in my eyes. Something harder. Something determined. "I'm not moving on," I said quietly. "Not yet." The thing about revenge is that most people do it wrong. They act impulsively, emotionally, and they get caught. They make it obvious. But I wasn't most people. I was a systems analyst who'd spent 7 years understanding exactly how Titanium Solutions worked. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every secret Derek thought was buried, and I was going to use that knowledge to give Derek exactly what he'd given me, a very public, very permanent ending to everything he'd built. I just needed time, patience, and the willingness to do what needed to be done. They say the best revenge is living well. Whoever said that never had their entire life destroyed in front of their coworkers by someone they trusted. No, the best revenge is surgical, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost. I stopped applying for jobs. That ship had sailed anyway. Instead, I focused every ounce of energy on one thing: understanding Derek's new reality at Titanium Solutions. First, I needed information. What was Derek doing now that I was gone? How was the Anderson project actually performing? What lies was he telling the board to cover up the mess he'd made? This is where my old insurance access came in handy. Late at night, when the office was empty and security systems went into low power mode, I could slip into the company's internal network through one of those maintenance backdoors I'd mentioned. I wasn't stealing anything, wasn't sabotaging anything, just ... observing, watching, learning, and what I learned was beautiful. Derek was drowning without me to clean up his disasters, to translate his vague demands into actual working strategies, to fix his mistakes before they became catastrophic. Everything was falling apart. The Anderson project was hemorrhaging money even faster than before. Deadlines were being missed. Clients were getting angry. But Derek, true to form, was doubling down on his lies. He'd hired a replacement for me. Some kid fresh out of business school named Tyler, who had no idea what he was walking into. Derek was making Tyler take responsibility for all my incomplete work, setting him up as the next scapegoat when things inevitably collapsed. Poor kid. I almost felt sorry for him almost. But the really interesting discovery came when I accessed Derek's personal email account. Yes, his personal account. You see, Derek had made the same mistake so many executives make. He'd used his work computer for personal business, and he'd saved all his passwords in the company system. Passwords I could see. Accounts I could access. And inside that personal email was a goldmine of evidence that went far beyond the Anderson project. Derek hadn't just framed me. He'd been systematically stealing from the company for 2 years. Fake expense reports, kickbacks from vendors, a consulting contract with a shell company. It was actually just Derek paying himself under a different name. He'd embezzled over $600,000. I sat back from my laptop, heart pounding. This was bigger than I'd imagined. Derek wasn't just a backstabbing boss. He was a criminal. But here's the thing. I couldn't just send this evidence to the police or the board of directors. Why? Because I'd obtained it by accessing systems I no longer had authorization to use. Any lawyer would shred my evidence as illegally obtained. Derek would walk free, and I'd end up in jail. No, I needed something smarter. I needed to make Derek expose himself. That's when I remembered the keys I'd given him, not physical keys. Digital ones. On my last day, as security had walked me out, Derek had made a big show of demanding I hand over all my administrative privileges. So I'd given him a USB drive, told him it contained all the master passwords, encryption keys, and access credentials he'd need to maintain the systems I'd built. What I hadn't told him was that those keys were designed with a very specific feature built in. A trigger. A timer. A self-destruct mechanism that I could activate remotely, you see. When I'd first built Titanium Solutions security infrastructure years ago, I'd included a failsafe, a way to remotely lock down everything if there was ever a security breach or emergency. It was meant to protect the company, but that failsafe was tied to my personal encryption protocols. And I'd never transferred complete control to anyone else, because Derek had never asked. He didn't understand the technology well enough to even know what questions to ask. So when I'd given him that USB drive, I'd given him access to everything, ... But I'd kept the master override. I'd kept the kill switch. Now, I just needed the right moment to use it. The moment when Derek would be most vulnerable, most exposed, most absolutely certain he'd gotten away with everything. That moment came faster than I expected. I was monitoring Derek's calendar. Yes, I could see that too when I noticed a board meeting scheduled for 3 weeks out. A big one. Annual performance review, budget approvals, strategic planning, and right there in the agenda notes, Anderson Project final presentation, Derek Patterson. Derek was going to present my project to the board. He was going to take credit for all the work I'd done, all the late nights, all the client relationships I'd built. He was probably going to blame any remaining problems on me, the disgraced former employee. It was perfect, because I was going to make sure that presentation became the worst moment of Derek's entire career. 2 weeks before the board meeting, I made my final preparations. I'd created a comprehensive package of evidence, all of Derek's crimes, all his lies, all his fraudulent dealings, emails, financial records, client communications, everything. But I couldn't just dump it on the board's doorstep. It had to come from somewhere legitimate, somewhere official. So I sent it all anonymously to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, financial misconduct. I gave them everything they needed, with a detailed timeline and a helpful suggestion that they might want to pay attention to Titanium Solutions board meeting on November 18th. I didn't know if they'd take the bait. Government agencies move slowly, but I'd planted the seed. The second part of my plan was more immediate, more personal. I reached out to Tyler, Derek's new scapegoat. I created a fake email account, posed as a concerned former employee, and sent him a warning. Told him to watch his back. Told him Derek had a pattern of blaming others for his mistakes. Gave him just enough information to make him paranoid. A few days later, I sent him more. Actual evidence this time, documents showing how Derek had blamed me for his decisions. Patterns he could recognize in his own situation. Tyler wasn't stupid. He started asking Derek questions, pushing back on unreasonable demands, documenting everything. Derek, of course, got angry. Started treating Tyler the same way he'd treated me, dismissive, condescending, threatening, and Tyler started looking for another job. But the most important piece of the plan, the nuclear option, was the kill switch built into those digital keys I'd given Derek. I'd spent weeks coding a very specific program. When activated, it would do several things simultaneously. First, it would lock Derek out of all the systems he needed to run his presentation. His laptop, the conference room projector, the shared drives where he'd stored his fraudulent data. Second, it would automatically compile and display a very different presentation, one I'd created. A presentation showing the truth about the Anderson project. Derek's actual decisions, his actual expenses, his actual lies. Third, it would trigger a data backup protocol that would send copies of all Derek's financial crimes directly to every member of the board of directors' personal email accounts. All of this would happen the moment Derek plugged in his laptop to start his presentation. The keys I'd given him wouldn't just fail. They'd expose everything. The night before the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, I was past that, but from anticipation. After 2 months of pain, humiliation, and unemployment, I was finally going to get justice the next morning. I positioned myself at a coffee shop across the street from Titanium Solutions headquarters. I had my laptop. I had my secure connection to the building's network. I had eyes on everything. I watched Derek arrive at 8:30, confident and smiling. Expensive suit. Perfect hair. The picture of success. He had no idea he was walking into his execution. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. At 9:45, I saw through the network cameras as Derek entered the conference room. The entire board was there. 12 executives, including the CEO. This was the big time. Derek shook hands, made jokes, set up his laptop. My finger hovered over the enter key. One click, and everything would activate. But I waited. I wanted him to be in the middle of his lies. I wanted him to feel safe, victorious. At 10:15, Derek started his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice came through the audio feed I'd quietly tapped into. I'm pleased to report that despite the challenges created by our former employees' misconduct, the Anderson project is back on track and performing beautifully. ... There it was. The lie, the blame, the rewriting of history. I pressed enter. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Derek's laptop screen went black. Technical difficulty, Derek said, his voice still confident but with a slight edge. Give me just a moment. He tapped keys, clicked the mouse. Nothing. Around the conference table, board members shifted uncomfortably. The CEO checked his watch. Derek, we have a tight schedule. Just 1 second, I promise. I don't know what the projector screen suddenly lit up, but it wasn't showing Derek's presentation. It was showing mine. Big. Bold letters filled the screen. The truth about the Anderson project. Derek's face went pale. I didn't, but the presentation was already moving forward, automated, unstoppable. Slide after slide of evidence. Derek's actual emails, his actual decisions. Financial records showing his expenses, his approvals, his lies, and then the bombshell. Documentation of his embezzlement, the fake consulting company, the kickbacks. $600,000 of theft laid out in irrefutable detail. The room erupted. What is this? Derek explained this immediately. Someone's hacking us, but Derek couldn't speak. He was frantically trying to shut down his laptop, yanking cables, pressing buttons. Nothing worked. The presentation kept rolling, and then right on cue, 12 smartphones around the conference table started chiming with email. Notifications. The board members looked down at their phones. Their faces changed from confusion to shock to anger. They were receiving the full evidence package. Every document, every email, every piece of Derek's criminal activity delivered directly to their personal accounts. From across the street, I watched it all through the camera feeds. It was better than I'd imagined. The CEO stood up, his face red with fury. Security. Get in here now. Derek, you're not moving from that chair until we get answers? Derek tried to run. Actually tried to push past people and run for the door. But the building's electronic locks had engaged another feature of my kill switch. The conference room door was sealed. He was trapped. With all his lies, with all his crimes, with nowhere to hide, it was Marcus. Derek shouted, desperation cracking his voice. This is Marcus. He's framing me. He, Marcus, the employee you publicly fired and humiliated. The CEO's voice was ice cold. The employee you blamed for your mistakes? These emails are from your account, Derek. These financial records have your authorization, your signatures, your access codes. He hacked me. Then you're admitting you have such poor security practices that a disgraced former employee can remotely humiliate you in front of the entire board. The CEO shook his head. Either way, you're finished. Security arrived. Real security, not just the building guards. People in suits with badges. And right behind them, 2 more visitors. Federal agents. The SEC had taken my bait after all. They'd been investigating for 2 weeks, quietly gathering their own evidence. My anonymous tip had given them everything they needed to move fast. Derek's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, his perfect suit suddenly looking rumpled, his perfect hair falling across his face. Everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, everything he'd lied about, it all came crashing down in less than 15 minutes, and I watched it all from across the street, sipping my coffee, feeling a weight lift from my chest that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make. I sent an email to the entire company. Not from my account, from an anonymous address that couldn't be traced. The subject line read, "The truth about Marcus and Derek." Inside was a summary of everything that had happened. The evidence, the setup, and the lies. And an explanation that Derek had framed me to cover his own crimes. Within an hour, everyone at Titanium Solutions knew the truth. My phone started buzzing. Text messages, voicemails, emails from former colleagues. "Marcus, we're so sorry. We should have known. We should have defended you." I didn't respond. Not yet. I was busy watching the news alerts pop up on my screen. Executive at Titanium Solutions arrested for embezzlement. Corporate fraud scandal rocks Chicago tech firm. Elderweight former employees' evidence leads to major white-collar crime bust. Derek Patterson's face was plastered across every business news site. Not as a success story. As a criminal, his career wasn't just over. It was destroyed, obliterated. There would be no comebacks, no second chances, no redemption arc, just like he'd tried to do to me. Except in his case, it was all true. 3 months later, I sat in a different conference room. This one had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, designer furniture, and a coffee machine that cost more than my first car. Across from me sat Jennifer Chen, CEO of Apex Technologies, one of Titanium Solutions' biggest competitors. Psst, Marcus, she said, sliding a contract across the table. I've been following your situation closely. What Derek did to you was unconscionable. What you did to him was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. ... Impressive. And it tells me you're exactly the kind of person I want on my team. It's a contract offered twice my old salary. A senior leadership position and a signing bonus that would cover 6 months of lost income. We need someone who understands systems, who values integrity, and who isn't afraid to stand up when things go wrong, she continued. Someone who documents everything, who sees the bigger picture, who protects themselves and their company. That's you. I signed the contract, but the story doesn't end there. Derek Patterson went to trial for months after his arrest. The evidence was overwhelming, not just my documentation, but additional crimes the federal investigation uncovered. He'd been stealing from the company for 3 years, not 2. The total was over $1 million. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution. Tyler, the replacement Derek had been grooming as his next scapegoat, reached out to thank me for the anonymous warnings. He'd found a better job before Derek's arrest, escaping the same fate I'd suffered. We got coffee, and I gave him some advice about protecting yourself in corporate environments. Always document. Always keep records. Always have insurance. As for Titanium Solutions, the company barely survived. The board of directors launched a full internal investigation, cleaned house of several Derek associates who'd been complicit in his schemes, and hired a completely new leadership team. They tried to apologize to me, offered me my job back with a promotion. I declined. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes, Lisa. My girlfriend, who'd supported me through those dark weeks, asked me if I regretted what I'd done. If I felt guilty about destroying Derek's life, I thought about it honestly before answering. I didn't destroy his life, I said. I exposed the truth. Derek destroyed his own life with his choices, his lies, his theft, his willingness to ruin other people to cover his mistakes. I just made sure he couldn't keep doing it. She nodded slowly. Do you feel better? Does revenge feel as good as you thought it would? And that's the complicated part. Yes. I felt vindicated. Watching Derek face consequences for his actions was deeply satisfying. Knowing the truth came out, that my reputation was cleared, that he couldn't hurt anyone else, that all felt right. But here's what they don't tell you about revenge. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't undo the humiliation I felt in that conference room. It doesn't give me back those sleepless nights, or the relationships that were damaged by my anger and obsession during those weeks of planning. Revenge is justice, but it's not healing. Justice is what you deserve. Healing is what you need. The real turning point for me came 6 months after Derek's sentencing. I was settling into my new role at Apex Technologies, building real relationships with colleagues who respected me, working on projects that excited me, and I realized I wasn't thinking about Derek anymore. Wasn't checking news articles about his prison term. Wasn't reliving that conference room moment. I'd moved on. Not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I'd built something new. That's the lesson I wish I'd understood earlier. The best response to betrayal isn't just exposing your betrayer. It's refusing to let their actions define your future. Derek thought firing me publicly would break me, would end my career, would prove he was stronger and smarter. Instead, it pushed me to stand up for myself, to value my own worth, to never again let loyalty blind me to someone's true character. Now, do I regret what I did to Derek? Honestly, no. He was a criminal who hurt people and deserved to face consequences. My methods were legally questionable, I'll admit that. But the evidence was real. The crimes were real. The victims were real. I just made sure justice wasn't optional, but I also learned something important. Not every betrayal deserves a revenge plot. Sometimes the best revenge really is just success, dignity. And walking away from toxic situations, Derek forced me to learn that lesson the hard way. And in a strange way, I'm grateful. Because that conference room humiliation, as painful as it was, taught me to value truth over loyalty, evidence over trust, and self-respect over any job. Today, I'm in a better position than I ever was at Titanium Solutions. I work with people who value integrity. I have policies that protect myself and document everything. And I sleep well at night, knowing that if someone ever tries to betray me again, I'll have the tools and the strength to defend myself. As for Derek, last I heard, he's 3 years into his sentence. He's lost everything: his career, his reputation, his freedom, his family. His wife divorced him. His kids won't speak to him. His professional network abandoned him. Some people might say that's too harsh, that everyone deserves a second chance. But Derek didn't just make a mistake. He deliberately destroyed people to protect himself. I was just one victim in a long pattern of behavior, and without consequences. He would have kept doing it, kept hurting people, kept stealing and lying his way through life. So no, I don't feel guilty. I feel free. If you're watching this video because someone betrayed you, because someone humiliated you, because someone tried to destroy what you built, I understand. I've been there. The anger is real. The desire for revenge is real. But before you act, ask yourself, what do I really want? Justice or healing? Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they're not. For me, I needed both. And I got both. But not everyone's path will look like mine. Whatever you choose, remember this: document everything. Value truth over comfort. Protect yourself first. And never let someone's betrayal make you forget your own worth. Because in the end, that's what saved me. Not the revenge. Not the exposure. Not watching Derek's empire crumble. What saved me was remembering that I was worth fighting for, and so are you.